next to the broadcast, the foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan work on strained bilateral ties on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, but Tokyo remains reluctant over righting historical wrongs. With his noticeable absence at a rare session of his rubber-stamp parliament, Kim Jongun may be suffering from medical problems related to overeating and overdrinking. The coalition grows against the militant group, the Islamic State, with more European nations on board to shut down the extremists. Primetime News begins now.
Welcome to the program. You're watching Primetime News live from Seoul. I am Kang Tae-ri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. President Park Geunhye and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe have yet to sit down for a one-on-one, but efforts are underway to clear the hurdles for a bilateral summit.
That's right. The foreign ministers of Korea and Japan held talks in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, with Seoul re-emphasizing a need for Tokyo to apologize for its wartime sexual enslavement. Our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sung-hee has more.
Meeting for the second time in less than 2 months on Thursday, Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida agreed to work on repairing their strained ties. Yoon stressed Japan's sincere efforts to heal the wounds of the so-called comfort women is essential. He expressed concerns over Tokyo's recent backpedaling on its past apologies to the Korean women who suffered at the hands of the Japanese army. Kishida reaffirmed Japan has no plans to revise the Kono Statement, a landmark apology to the comfort women that was issued in 1993. The meeting came just days after Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sent a personal letter to President Park Geunhye, officially expressing his wish for a summit later this fall. The two diplomats are thought to have discussed the details of a possible summit in November on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Beijing. That would be the first bilateral meeting between the two leaders, as President Park has refused to meet with Abe before he apologizes for Japan's wartime atrocities. But before any summit can take place, analysts say Japan must show it's serious.
To make an apology, you need to give it once with sincerity. And I think that the Korean people have come to doubt the expressions of remorse and regret from Japan because of other statements that have been made.
And on the part of Korea, experts say Seoul must be ready to accept an apology from Japan when the time comes. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
President Park Geunhye returned home this Friday following a week-long overseas trip to Canada as well as the United States for this year's UN General Assembly. Our Kwon So-ah has a wrap-up of this presidential trip.
President Park Geun-hye began her high-profile visits to Canada and New York, seeking understanding from the international community for her policies. And the presidential office of Cheongwade says she was successful in doing that. In her debut at the UN General Assembly in New York, President Park sought international support for her North Korea and unification policies. She also highlighted the gravity of North Korea's human rights abuses. At high-level meetings over global issues, including climate change, terrorism, and education, President Park promoted Korea's contributions as a major middle power and vowed to expand its role even more. Prior to her trip to New York, President Park made a state visit to Canada, where the biggest achievement was elevating bilateral ties to a strategic partnership through the signing of a bilateral free trade pact. It is Canada's first such agreement with a nation in the Asia-Pacific. The president's overseas schedule was packed, but there's just as much to do back in Seoul. The National Assembly remains deadlocked over a special law meant to investigate April's Haewolho ferry disaster, and a number of bills intended to jumpstart the economy remain pending as well. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
President Park Geunhye's speech at the UN certainly did not make North Korea happy. The regime has once again slammed the South Korean leader for her remarks. In a statement on Friday, North Korea's Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of Korea says it's the first time for a head of state to throw ludicrous remarks on the UN stage and claimed it was a declaration of war against North Korea. The committee called President Park's comments on North Korea's human rights and nuclear program a serious provocation and a direct challenge to its leadership. Seoul's Unification Ministry calls this statement regrettable, adding Pyongyang should think about why the international community is calling for change in its human rights situation as well as a nuclear program.
North Korean leader Kim Jongun was noticeably absent from the regime's second parliamentary session this year. In fact, the last time he was seen publicly was some 3 weeks ago with a limp. That and his increasing composition has raised questions over whether he's suffering from weight-related diseases. Shin Se-min reports on the mounting concerns over Kim's health.
It was a no-show for the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at the 13th Supreme People's Assembly held on Thursday, and the absence is fueling speculations about his health. The young leader Kim, who has not been seen in public since September 3rd, missed a meeting for the first time since he took power in 2011. Several weeks of absence has stirred up questions about Kim's possible health problems, as he has been seen walking with a limp in recent news reports released by the state media. North Korea, however, replaced its vice chairman Choi Ryong-hae of the National Defense Commission to Hwang Byung-seo, the director of the all-powerful General Political Bureau of Pyongyang's Korean People's Army. Choi, once a key confidant of North Korean leader, succeeding Kim's uncle Chang Song-taek, has been dismissed from his seat. The day-long meeting has brought together some 650 delegates to approve some of the key public policy and legal measures, along with overhauling the country's mandatory schooling and conscription systems. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Policy begins a week-long trip to Asia this weekend. Glenn Davies will start off in China and then arrive in Seoul on Tuesday for talks with his South Korean counterpart Hwang Jung-guk before finishing up in Japan. U.S. diplomatic sources say the visits are part of routine consultations among member states of the six-party talks aimed at stopping North Korea's nuclear development. Davies will be accompanied on the trip by Sidney Seiler, the newly appointed U.S. Special Envoy for the six-party nuclear talks. Turning to domestic politics, amid the opposition party's boycott of the National Assembly, Korea's ruling party was determined to pass nearly 100 bills this week with or without them. But the Assembly Speaker shut down Parliament and gave the opposition party a chance to compose itself over the weekend. Ji Myung-gil has the details.
The 153 lawmakers of the ruling Saenuri Party who showed up to Friday's plenary session did so expecting to pass some 90 pending bills, even though lawmakers of the main opposition party continued their boycott of all parliamentary proceedings. Assembly Speaker Chung Eui-hwa was welcomed with applause upon entering the plenary floor, but their cheers quickly changed to surprise.
As the governing party, we have a duty to pass legislative bills and government budgets in a proper manner with the cooperation of the opposition party. Although you are here, I ask for your forgiveness as I am adjourning today's session until September 30th.
At that session, Chung said more pending bills should be brought to the floor in addition to the 91 draft bills that have already been approved by related parliamentary committees. Chung also endorsed a proposal that next year's government budget be voted on at the National Assembly no later than December 2nd, and called for setting a specific timetable for its annual audit of the government. Ruling party floor leader Lee Won-gu had another surprise in store. He offered his resignation to take responsibility for not being able to normalize parliamentary affairs, but ruling party chairman Kim Moo-sung declined to accept it. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy plans to open a general meeting this weekend, where they will seek to reach a compromise on the upcoming parliamentary proceedings and decide whether they will attend next Tuesday's plenary session. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Curry's comments came in response.
Your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Che-ri from the heart of Seoul.
News begins now.
Primetime News, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
Korea and China are still divided over a number of sensitive issues in their bilateral free trade agreement talks. The two hope to wrap this up by the end of this year, but is it too ambitious? Our Kim Min-ji has the details on the 13th round of free trade agreement negotiations between Korea and China.
The latest round of talks on a Korea-China free trade agreement came to an end Friday, and while some progress was made, the two sides remain divided over some highly sensitive issues. In the 13th round of negotiations held in Beijing, the two sides discussed a range of topics from products to services and investment. There were compromises made with customs issues such as exempting shipments of less than $700 from submitting a certificate of origin. They also agreed to complete customs procedures on shipments within 48 hours of arrival. But differences do remain. Korea wants China to lift tariffs on Korean manufacturing products in the early stages of implementation, and China wants the Korean market open for agricultural products. Neither side has been willing to budge on those issues. The two countries have now so far agreed on 4 of 22 chapters for their FTA and are nearing compromises in several other chapters, including economic cooperation. Korea's trade ministry said the two sides have yet to decide on a date for their next round of talks. President Park Geunhye and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed in talks earlier this summer to wrap up FTA talks by the end of this year. China is Korea's biggest trading partner in terms of both imports and exports. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Korea's consumer sentiment remained flat in September. The Bank of Korea says the country's consumer sentiment index came in at 107, still managing to stay above the boom and bust level of 100 and close to the 108 level recorded just before the April ferry disaster.
Strikes over pay at Hyundai Motor and its sister company Kia Motors have become a regular occurrence in recent years, and the continued work stoppages are standing as a major setback for the companies. Hwang Ji-hye tells us more.
Another round of strikes over contentious wage talks began earlier this week following Hyundai Motor Group's $10 billion purchase of land in Seoul. It follows a similar partial walkout last month that cost Hyundai Motor and affiliate Kia Motors more than $1 billion. Over the past few years, strikes over pay negotiations have hit the automakers' factories in Korea, even though their wages are among the highest in the automotive industry. What's worse is that Hyundai factories at home have the lowest productivity compared to those abroad. And because Hyundai tries to make up the production losses coming from work stoppages by lowering costs of auto parts, experts say raising productivity through more research and development is a long way off.
Once strikes go on for a prolonged period of time, it's not just Hyundai that's going to take a major hit. Parts suppliers and other related industries will also see their sales numbers drop, resulting in a negative impact on the overall economy.
They add that the walkouts could lead to fewer domestic employment opportunities as Hyundai will move factories overseas to cut down on costs and automate its assembly line. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics has taken a shot at Apple and its bending iPhones problem. Take a look at Samsung Electronics' tweet on Thursday. It says, curved, not bent, along with a picture of its soon-to-be-released Galaxy Note Edge. Now, some iPhone 6 users have complained that their smartphones were bending under pressure. Apple says those cases are very rare and that its phones do not bend under normal use. So Samsung is certainly taking this opportunity to take a witty shot at Apple. And remember what it did back in, was it earlier this year when Apple released its iPhone 5 series? So that was last year, right?
Right. So, yeah, those commercials were making fun of all the people who camp overnight in front of the Apple store. And Samsung said back then that if you're waiting for the next big thing, it's already here with our gadgets.
Right.
But, you know, from some of this recent manufacturing problems at Apple, it's beginning to make me think that the war between Samsung and Apple is becoming a little bit more even now.
Right, because Apple's operating system has been obviously industry leading. We just have to say that. But with this bending iPhones issue, Apple may be showing some weakness when it comes to manufacturing now.
Right, and Samsung, of course, has great manufacturing, but it's still struggling with trying to develop its own operating system.
So maybe that's when names like Xiaomi comes into play, right?
Right, because if you can't knock it out of the park,
Right.
why don't you just pay less?
No, because smartphones are definitely more commoditized.
Right. So it really does put some pressure on Samsung and Apple to create a situation where they get both of them 150% right.
And then the fear, well, I don't want to say fear, but the idea is that the next player to do so will maybe from China.
No, that is a scary. Those are scary words.
Yeah. So that should keep everyone on their toes. I mean, look at what happened to Nokia, BlackBerry.
Motorola, all legitimate warnings to not rest on your laurels. All right, well, we'll take a second to think about that and be right back.
Now, turning to the global fight against Islamic State militants, British Prime Minister David Cameron has urged his parliament to approve launching airstrikes against IS targets in Iraq.
With more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, tell us about how lawmakers in the UK are debating this pressing issue at this very hour. How is Cameron pitching this long-term military campaign?
Well, the Prime Minister said it was in Britain's national interest to join U.S.-led airstrikes to tackle IS militants, but he did warn it could take months, if not several years. This as the parliamentary motion is reportedly expected to win cross-party support. Cameron, who is up for re-election next year, has ruled out sending British ground troops to fight and made clear that its involvement would not extend into Syria. However, many Brits say they are wary of another long war following drawn-out campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. On Thursday, anti-war campaigners gathered outside Downing Street in protest at the proposed military action.
I don't agree with military action. I don't see how that can ever improve the situation. Innocent civilians will get killed, just like what's just happened in Gaza. Children, the infrastructure gets destroyed, hospitals, schools, that never helps anybody. It creates another generation of people who hate the West.
Britain says around 500 of its citizens have already traveled to fight in Syria and Iraq, raising fears that jihadist fighters could return home to stage attacks, something that Cameron has described as the biggest threat to national security. Meanwhile, other Western allies of the U.S., including Australia, Belgium, and the Netherlands, have agreed to join the airstrikes. And staying in Europe, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has said his government is preparing a comprehensive plan to apply for EU membership by the year 2020. The new head of state said Thursday that his plan would include a range of social and economic reforms in order to pave the way to join the European Union. The move would follow the former Soviet Republic's landmark agreement for closer ties with the EU, which was ratified last Tuesday. However, analysts say the ultimate goal of EU membership is based more on rhetoric than reality.
Had the European Union been seriously interested in Ukrainian membership, it could have made the offer at almost any time since 2004. Furthermore, even if the offer were to be made, I think you're seriously looking at a couple of decades before Ukraine's likely to be anywhere close to meeting the standards.
Poroshenko added a ceasefire struck with pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine earlier this month was still holding, and that the peace would be sustained ahead of local elections in the rebel-held areas next month. Turning to France, former President Nicolas Sarkozy has once again thrown his hat into the ring with a major rally marking his political comeback. On Thursday, thousands of people came out to support Sarkozy in northern France at the official launch of his campaign. The ex-president, known for his extravagance, is attempting to change his image to that more of a softer and approachable politician, something that many believe cost him the re-election in 2012. Declaring his return to politics, Sarkozy pledged to win back voters one by one.
The way the French were put against each other was a serious mistake and will stay Mr. Hollande's mandate for a long time. I have learned and remembered, I have understood that experience and age are good reasons to try and become better.
Sarkozy says his current campaign will focus on the leadership of the center-right UMP party ahead of the next general elections. However, political watchers say his ambitions will likely extend to France's 2017 presidential race. And finally, Pope Francis has fired a senior bishop in Paraguay in the wake of a child abuse case involving a local priest. Vatican officials said on Thursday that the Pope had removed Bishop Ricardo Livieres Plano from his post for what they describe as serious pastoral concerns. Plano was heavily criticized for promoting a priest who was accused of being a threat to children and attempting to cover up the allegations. However, both men say the charges against them are unfounded. The move comes 2 days after Francis approved the arrest of a former archbishop at the Vatican who stands accused of paying for sex with children while serving as a papal ambassador for the Dominican Republic. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here next week.
Hello and welcome to Friday's Asian Games updates. Now first off, with swimming, South Korea's Marine boy Park Tae-won and the South Korean men pulled off a bronze in the 4x100-meter medley relay. And the third place finish gave Park his 20th medal at 3 Asiads, surpassing retired shooter Park Byung-taek's 19-medal count for the Korean record and immortalizing him in the Asian Games lore. Meanwhile, his Chinese rival Sun Yang took the 1500-meter freestyle gold for another successful games and 3 gold medals there. But the biggest head-turner here was first-timer Japan's Kosuke Hagino, who earned 4 golds, a silver, and 2 bronzes. And we go to let's go to the medal standings on Friday were actually not that great for South Korea because they hit third for a moment, but that was until the equestrian event jumping finals. And after that, they got back to second. But it was a masterful performance by rider Song Sang-wook and his horse Fantasia. And it gave him the best score of 37.90 for the individual gold. Bang Shide and her steed, Thomas O'Malley II, earned the bronze. Meanwhile, China's Hua Tian sandwiched in between them for the silver. Now, with those 2 Koreans leading the charge, South Korea was also able to gallop away with the team gold. Japan and Hong Kong followed. And going on to bowling, a South Korean pair of bowlers hits strikes and spares and everything in between for the country's first bowling gold medal. They blew by their closest contenders, Malaysia, by 35 points over 6 games, while Sun Yeon-hee averaged the highest score of the pack at 218.33 to anchor the partnership. Meanwhile, the pair of Lee Young-sung and Chung Da-eun got the bronze. And over to weightlifting, Kim Min-jae grabbed South Korea's second weightlifting medal of the Games in the men's 105-kilo division, earning silver. However, it was China's Yang Jie who took home the gold. Yang only recorded 2 successful lifts, but his 186-kilo snatch and 217-kilo clean and jerk were enough to top Kim's 397 total score. And now to football, where the South Korean women's team faced off against the Chinese Taipei team in the quarterfinals. And despite dominating the game in both opportunities and possessions, Korea struggled to find a breakthrough, and the first half finished scoreless. And that was until the 73rd minute when Yoo Young-ah headed down across for Chun Gae-eul, who turned it into the net. Final score was 1-0 Korea. And that wraps it up for now. I leave you with the medal count and a look at weekend's events. I'll see you later.
Happy Friday and welcome. Light rain is falling here in Seoul as well as regions down south, and between 5 to 20 millimeters is expected through later tonight. As for this weekend, partly cloudy skies and warm afternoon conditions will make it great for outdoor activities, but do keep in mind the big gap in temperatures from day to night. Make the most out of the weather this weekend because showers are in store next Thursday. Over in Incheon, where the Asian Games are taking place, there is a slim chance for light early morning showers tomorrow, but for the most part, conditions should be partly cloudy. On to Saturday's numbers. Seoul hits 26 degrees, Gwangju and Busan 27. On to other places. Daejeon and Jeju make it to 26, Dokdo 23, Mount Kumgang 25. Have a wonderful Friday evening. I'll be back with more updates after midnight. See you then.
All right, thanks, Po-kyung. And that's Primetime News for this Friday. Thanks for watching. I'm Kang Chiri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.